Donald Trump's trade war has turned into an ego battle. He says China wants a deal but doesn't know how to ask for it. China says we are not afraid and fires back. As of this moment, US tariffs on China stand at 145%. Chinese tariffs on the US are at 125%. It's absurd. And it's spilling beyond trade, from Hollywood to travelers to treasuries. Everything is in the line of fire. For the rest of the world, the pain is not over. Markets are still in the red. India is worried about China dumping cheap goods. Europe is exploring trade deals left, right and center. Apple airlifted 1.5 million iPhones from India to beat the tariffs. So the churn is very much on. We will try to make sense of it. Meanwhile, in China, Xi Jinping is fighting another battle. This one is with his own army. He has sacked a top general in yet another round of his never-ending purge. We will bring you the inside story. In West Asia, US and Iran will meet for talks tomorrow. Is another nuclear deal possible? The 2028 Olympics look to woo India and Indian fans, bringing cricket back in the games. And a special report on how fast fashion is killing the planet. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. The Indian consulate in Melbourne is vandalized by unidentified miscreants who sprayed graffiti at the entrance of the building. India raises the incident with the Australian authorities. An investigation has been launched. In the past, pro-Khalistan groups have often targeted Hindu temples in Melbourne. US envoy Steve Witkoff meets Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. He also met with Moscow's top economic negotiator. Putin has held 2 previous meetings with Witkoff. This is the American official's 3rd visit to Russia since Trump took office. It comes amid Washington's push for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Kenyan police fired tear gas during a school drama competition. They wanted to disperse the crowd that had come to watch a play, which talks about the youth losing faith in their leaders. The play also featured battles with the police and drew parallels with last year's protests against President William Ruto's tax hikes. 4 men publicly executed in Afghanistan. It's the highest number of executions in a single day since the Taliban returned to power in 2021. The executions took place in sports stadiums across 3 provinces. The Taliban sent official notices to invite the public to attend these events. And South Korea's impeached former President Yoon Suk-yeol leaves his official residence. Last week, he was stripped of all power and privileges for declaring martial law in December. Yoon still faces a criminal trial on insurrection charges. South Korea will hold its presidential election on the 3rd of June to replace Yoon.
He made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million.
It started off as a global trade war. Now it's more of an ego battle. Who can throw up the bigger tariff number? Donald Trump or Xi Jinping? Their tariff battle is spooking the markets. Investors had started to feel confident after Trump's 90-day pause, but now the sell-off is back. In Japan, the Nikkei dropped almost 3% in today's trade. In South Korea, the Kospi closed 0.5% down. In the US, markets have opened in red. In Germany, the DAX is almost 1.5% down. But India escaped this rout. Our markets were closed yesterday, so the effect of Trump's pause was seen today. The Sensex closed 1.7% up, and the Nifty closed almost 2% up. Gold prices are also zooming. The yellow metal is seen as a stable investment. People buy gold when things are uncertain. And that's happening right now. In New Delhi, gold is selling at more than 96,000 rupees. That's 96,000 for 10 grams of gold. At the start of April, it was 93,000. So gold prices are rising fast. Meanwhile, the US dollar is weakening. It fell to a 3-year low against the euro today and a 10-year low against the Swiss franc. This is a classic warning sign. because, like gold, the dollar is a safe bet. Yet investors are moving away from the US currency. In fact, the dollar had its worst day since 2022. What does that tell you? That investors are not feeling confident in America. President Trump has partially admitted this. He said that there would be transition costs because of the tariffs.
We think we're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing. We're doing again what we should have done many years ago. We let it get out of control.
So who is paying these transition costs? And if someone is paying, who is benefiting? That's another question that's haunting Trump. The Democrats are accusing him of insider trading. Now, first of all, what is insider trading? It is when you use non-public information to make investments. Say you work in the US government. You knew that Trump was going to pause his tariffs. Perhaps you were in the room when it was decided. You then tell your friend about this decision, and they buy up stocks before the president announces it. Once he does, your stocks go through the roof. So this is one example of insider trading, when you use insider information to benefit in trade. But why is Trump being accused of it? For mainly two reasons. First, look at this social media post by Donald Trump. He put this out on Wednesday morning. It says, "This is a great time to buy." He also signed off with his initials, DJT, Donald J. Trump. Now, fun fact, DJT is also the ticker name for Trump's social media company. It trades on the NASDAQ as DJT. 4 hours later, Trump paused the tariffs on most countries. And the result? American market shot up. Many Democrats have questioned this timing. They want a probe into the events of that day. They want to see if Trump's family members made dubious bets. That's the first reason for the suspicion. The second is Trump's comments. He hosted a few of his friends in the Oval Office yesterday. Look at what he said.
He made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million. That's not bad.
Now, there is no precedent here. US presidents have not been accused of insider trading before, so it's not clear if Trump will face action and what kind of action. Plus, the Democrats have no moral high ground, really. Their top officials have been accused of the exact same thing. And speaking of manipulation, it's not just happening in the stock market. It could be happening in the US bond market too. In fact, experts feel that that is what forced Trump's hand. Investors began dumping US bonds this week. And on cue, the interests began rising, meaning the cost of borrowing started surging. Now, the question is, who triggered this? Some analysts have been studying the trends, and they say the sell-off happened at night. And why is this significant? Because American investors would be trading in the morning, not at night. They would be trading during their normal work hours. Only foreign investors would be trading at night because of the time difference. Again, the question is who? A lot of countries buy up US Treasury bonds, but these are the largest shareholders. At number one is Japan. Japan holds US bonds worth $1 trillion. China is second with $768 billion. The UK is third with $765 billion. Tiny Luxembourg is fourth with $424 billion. And Cayman Islands is fifth with around $397 billion. Did any of these players trigger the sell-off? Japan's finance minister was asked this question on Wednesday, and he ruled it out point blank. Nonetheless, the suspicion is on Japan and China, and we can only speculate at this point. So let's look at the strategy instead. Can the US bonds be a tool to keep Trump disciplined? Can you weaponize the bonds? Well, you can, but it's a double-edged sword. A bond sell-off would hurt America, yes. It would make US government borrowing more expensive. It would also filter down to US housing budget, so consumers and government would feel the pinch. It will impact the US in a bad way. Having said that, it would hurt China as well. A bond sell-off would weaken the US dollar, which would indirectly strengthen the Chinese currency, the yuan. And Beijing does not like that. Their economy is mainly focused on exports, so a stronger yuan would make them less competitive. Simply put, this move would hurt both sides. It tells you how interdependent these two economies are through trade, through government debt, and through investments. Though right now, neither side seems to care. So two of the world's biggest economies are locking horns, the United States and China. They're in a trade war and it is getting uglier by the day. Each day brings a new tariff. This is no longer about policy. This has become a contest, with each side trying to outdo the other. Yesterday, the US raised tariffs on China again. The new rate is 145%. 145% tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the US. And today, China hit back. They will tax all US imports at 125% now. At the same time, Beijing has drawn a line. It said that this would be their final move. No more tariff hikes from China after this one. Because frankly, the numbers don't matter anymore. They have stopped making sense. China says the current tariffs are already too high. At these levels, trade between the US and China no longer makes sense. So if Trump raises tariffs again, Beijing says it will not respond, at least not on the tariff front. The Chinese Commerce Ministry issued a statement. It said this numbers game, and I'm quoting, has become a joke. And China's Foreign Ministry went further to say this.
Our countermeasures against the U.S. bullying are not only to protect our legitimate rights and interests, but also to uphold international rules and order, safeguard the common interests of all countries, and maintain international fairness and justice. In the face of U.S. bullying and hegemony, compromise and concession are not a way out.
They're calling the Americans bullies. Trump doesn't seem too bothered, though. He has repeated his offer. Donald Trump wants to sort things out with Xi Jinping. Yesterday, he called the Chinese president a friend.
What happens with China? We would love to be able to work a deal. We're resetting the table. And I'm sure that we'll be able to get along very well. I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries. I look forward to it.
Trump did not have to wait long for a response. Today, China's president broke his silence. Xi Jinping spoke publicly for the first time since the trade war began. And his message to President Trump was clear. We won't be making any deals. In fact, let me quote from what he said. For over 70 years, China's development has relied on self-reliance and hard work, never on handouts from others, and it is not afraid of any unjust suppression. We are not afraid. That is the message from Xi Jinping, and China is hitting back. It is expanding the battlefield. This is not just about tariffs anymore. This dispute is spilling into other areas like people-to-people ties. China has issued a travel warning for the US. It's on your screen now. Take a look. Beijing has advised for its citizens traveling to the US. It says, and I quote, fully assess the risk of traveling to the United States and to travel with caution. And that's not all. They've also issued an advisory for students. Those who are enrolled in American universities, they have been told to assess, and I'm quoting again, assess security risks. Basically, China feels that American campuses are not safe anymore. That's what it's telling its citizens. Like I said, this is not about tariffs. China is firing in all directions, like selling US bonds. They're also called US treasuries. A bond, as you would know, is US government debt. And China owns US bonds worth billions of dollars, about 760 billion at this point. Now, China could sell these bonds. Why does it matter? And how can China weaponize these US bonds? Let me explain. Think of the US government like a trillionaire businessman. Let's name him Uncle Sam. Every year, Uncle Sam needs money. He has to build new roads, new schools. Uncle Sam runs hospitals as well, and they too need funding. And of course, he has to pay salaries. Now, Uncle Sam does not always have enough cash to do all of this, so he borrows. He asks others to lend him some cash. And he promises that he will pay back the loan. The loan amount plus a little extra as interest. He will pay all of it back. Now, for this loan, Uncle Sam issues a special contract. A contract that spells out how and when the loan will be repaid and how much interest will be paid with it. This contract is called a bond. So Uncle Sam has his bonds ready, but who will give him the money? He reaches out to an investor called Dragon. For years, Investor Dragon has been a good friend to Uncle Sam. He has loaned Uncle Sam large sums of money, and it has worked out well for both sides. Uncle Sam repays the money on time, no missed payments, no defaults. He has been a safe investment for Investor Dragon. But now their deal is in trouble because Investor Dragon and Uncle Sam have had a fight. They no longer trust each other. So Investor Dragon has refused new loans. In fact, he is asking for his money back. So suddenly there's pressure on Uncle Sam because he has to repay the dragon. So he must get more money, more loans. And because he has upset so many other people too, he has to promise them more interest. In other words, the loans have become more expensive. The debt is piling up. Uncle Sam cannot keep up with his payments. His entire business starts feeling this burden of debt. He cannot pay salaries. He cannot bid for new contracts. His existing projects slow down, and his entire business comes to a grinding halt. Now, let's say Uncle Sam is the US economy and Investor Dragon, I'm sure you've guessed it, is China. What happens if China walks away? If it starts dumping US bonds or loans or treasuries, whatever you call it, it could crash the US economy. At the same time, it would hurt China too. Like we just explained, this is a double-edged sword, and China would wield it carefully. Xi Jinping's statement today shows that he is not in a hurry. He is willing to drag this out for as long as it takes. And Donald Trump should know this. Unlike him, Xi Jinping does not have to face an election. He has elected himself as president for life. There is no one to challenge his authority in China at this point. But Trump does not have that kind of time or luxury. He wants a deal with China, and he wants China to ask for it. We say, good luck with that. $145% tariffs. That's virtually an embargo on China. If something sold for $100 earlier, it will now cost $245. At those rates, nobody will buy Chinese goods. But here's the thing, somebody will have to. China exports goods worth $439 billion to the US. Those goods will now be uncompetitive in America. Simply put, they will be too expensive. So China will look to sell them elsewhere, and India could be a prime target. The most populous country in the world, a surging middle class, and a short hop from Chinese ports. Many experts are predicting this shift. They feel China could dump goods in the Indian market. Now, dump does not mean literally dump. It's a term used in global trade. Again, let's look at a hypothetical example. Say China produces a plastic toy at home. They sell it for $3 in the Chinese market, but the same product is also exported to India, and here in India, they sell it for $2. So the export price is less than the domestic price. Such a scenario is called dumping. Countries do it to expand their market presence, basically to sell more goods abroad. Many experts feel that China could start doing this to India, flood our markets with cheap imports. If you're a consumer, this may sound like a good thing to you. Who doesn't like a good deal after all? But dumping is bad for Indian producers. They will not be able to compete with cheap Chinese products. So Indian industry will be affected. And how is New Delhi addressing this? Let me quote what Indian officials have said. The government will take measures available in our legal framework, both direct and indirect steps to curb any dumping of products from nations facing steep tariffs from the US will be taken. Our main weapon is duties, specifically anti-dumping duties. Now, duties are basically a form of tax. They can be imposed on domestic or foreign goods. These anti-dumping duties apply to the foreign ones. So, in effect, they work like a tariff. Say you're importing a $2 toy from China, but you also impose a 50% duty on it. Then the price bumps up to $3. That's how duties work. India has already imposed anti-dumping duties on China. Last month, 5 Chinese imports were targeted, like vacuum flasks, aluminium foil, and disinfectants. Before that, solar glass was targeted. This is a particular type of glass used in solar panels. India imposed extra duties on this glass, about $660 per ton. Now, reports say more such moves are being considered, especially for the steel sector. The government is mulling a 20% duty on Chinese steel imports. This would nullify fears of steel dumping. And how would China respond to this? Well, they could impose similar duties on Indian goods. They could also take India to the World Trade Organization, the WTO, because dumping is not illegal. Not unless you can prove that it is hurting your domestic industry. But things may not escalate that far because China is trying to woo India. Amid the tariff chaos, Xi Jinping has reached out to India. He called for a dragon-elephant tango. Basically, he wants India and China to respond together. Of course, India is under no pressure to do so. The government is trying to turn this challenge into an opportunity. The Commerce Minister spoke to the media again today. He said India does want a trade deal, but it would not negotiate at gunpoint.
हम बंदूक रख के कभी नेगोशिएट नहीं करते। समय की पाबंदियां अच्छी रहती हैं कि वो प्रोत्साहित करती हैं कि तेजी से बात हो, लेकिन जब तक देशहित और जनहित को हम सुरक्षित ना रख सके तब तक कभी भी जल्दबाजी करना अच्छा नहीं है।
China's appeals to India are unlikely to work. For starters, New Delhi has a great equation with Donald Trump, and secondly, the government does not want to fight the tariffs. It wants to strike a deal. Now, on both counts, India's approach is different from China. So I'm afraid there is little scope for cooperation. As for dumping, it remains a real concern for Indian producers. It should also be a concern for Indian policymakers because the deficit with China is already widening. China's exports to India surged 10% in the last fiscal year. They increased by 10%, but India's exports to China dropped 15%. So New Delhi's message must be loud and clear. We are not a dumping ground for cheap Chinese goods. Which brings us to Europe. They were bracing for a full-blown trade war, but then Trump hit the brakes. The tariffs are on hold for 90 days. So Europe is now in a limbo. They have 89 days to strategize. What is their game plan? The first step was de-escalation. No tit-for-tat tariffs like China. Remember, the US had slapped 20% tariffs on Europe and Europe had hit back with 25%. But now with Trump hitting pause, Europe too is pulling back. They have suspended their countermeasures. Like I said, a climb down.
We want to negotiate. We want to talk. We appreciate that you have brought this pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs, and we in turn are now pausing our proposed countermeasures in order that we have the maximum space to consult with our member states, consult with our industry, and negotiate with the US. We're ready to make deals. Let's talk.
So Europe wants to give diplomacy a shot, and they're moving quickly. New EU-US tariff talks kick off on Monday. The EU Trade Commissioner is headed to Washington. Europe insists that these talks are in good faith, that it wants solutions, not standoffs. The top priority is a trade deal, and Europe is pushing hard for it. But what happens if talks fall apart? What if the tariffs come back after 89 days? Well, Europe is not walking in blind. They're quietly preparing for a plan B, or should I say multiple plan Bs. Europe wants to be ready to respond if things go south. And they're exploring many options. Number one is the China card. If Washington is throwing punches, Beijing is rolling out red carpets. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is in China. He met with President Xi Jinping. Xi called for closer ties with Europe, and it was echoed by Sanchez.
Spain is in favor of more balanced relations between the European Union and China, of finding negotiated solutions to our differences, which we have, and of greater cooperation in areas of common interest.
At present, changes unseen in a century are unfolding across the world at a faster pace, bringing about an array of interwoven risks and challenges. Only through solidarity and coordination can countries maintain world peace and stability and promote global development and prosperity.
And that's not all. In late July, EU leaders will be in Beijing for a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The second EU-China summit. The first one was also held in Beijing. The second one was supposed to be held in Brussels. But Xi Jinping does not want to travel to Europe, and it seems the Europeans are happy to make the trek. This visit is expected to focus on trade and technology, but essentially it's about leverage. Washington is playing hardball, so Europe needs some tough posturing too, and it needs some partners. And Beijing is happy to be that partner. Now look at this latest report. It says Europe and China are talking about EV tariffs. Last year, the EU imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. They're as high as 45.3%. But now they're discussing lifting the tariffs and exploring other options like setting minimum prices for Chinese cars. Basically, China is opening its doors and Europe is cautiously walking through. That does not mean that the EU is choosing China over the US, not yet at least. Which brings us to plan number 2, diversification. The EU wants to diversify its trade options. The idea is to minimize risks if the trade war continues. The EU and the UAE have begun talks for a free trade deal. Europe is also talking to India for a free trade agreement. It also signed a trade deal with South America's biggest economy, so the message is quite clear: more partners, less pressure. That's the EU playbook. Then we come to option number 3, retaliation. Europe may be choosing negotiation for now, but they're not shying away from hitting back.
We are ready to defend our economic interests and our companies if it's necessary, if we do not see movement from a US side. But that's not our first choice, because we see those tariffs as damaging for EU economy, we see them as damaging for US economy and for a global economy, so we rather work to avoid this negative scenario.
So what will they do? The European Union president gave the answer in a recent interview. She says Europe could use a trade bazooka and tax American big tech. US tech giants have a massive presence in Europe, but they pay shockingly little in taxes. Now Europe wants to flip the script. They're pushing for a bold digital tax targeting big tech's deep pockets. And that's not all. They've got a powerful trade weapon in their back pocket. It's called the ACI, the Anti-Coercion Instrument. Europe rolled it out in 2023. They haven't used it yet, but they're not afraid to pull the trigger. If they do, the ACI gives them serious muscle to strike back against economic pressure. The message is simple: play fair or pay up. So to sum it up, Europe is walking a tightrope. They're giving diplomacy a shot, but they're also preparing alternatives, because in 89 days the clock runs out, and if talks collapse, the tariffs come crashing in. At that point, Europe does not want to be caught off guard. It wants to be battle ready.
The United States is still imposing tariffs on China, and China is firmly opposed to such bullying. China will absolutely not accept pressure, threats and blackmail. That is not the right way to deal with China. If the US side really wants to talk, it should show an attitude of equality, respect and reciprocity. If the United States ignores the interests of the two countries and the international community and insists on fighting a tariff war and a trade war, China will certainly accompany it to the end.
We've seen the global markets going through quite a seesaw over Trump's tariff policies, and in particular policies or uncertainty in policies in relation to China. And now again, at a cabinet meeting at the White House on Thursday, we saw clearly contradictory statements emerge on China, hardly likely to be calming for the markets or bring clarity on what the US policy is. Trump, on the one hand, said a deal with China can be worked out.
And I'm sure that we'll be able to get along very well. I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
And within minutes, he was saying this.
What they've done to our country, they've destroyed our economic base to a large extent. The good news is we're very vibrant, and we're going to get it back fast. We already have. Look, we're making $2 billion a day now.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it more sharply.
One of the most important things I believe you'll achieve in your presidency is reordering the world in a proper way. For 31 years, more than 31 years now, multiple administrations have allowed the Chinese to deindustrialize this country, to take away jobs and factories and pillars of our national strength. And what you're doing now, I think, is a great service to our country, but ultimately to the world.
Trump insisted that the US is on a good track in negotiations with several other countries, but he did acknowledge that it may not all be smooth going.
We think we're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition.
Custom clearance at India's Chennai airport usually takes 30 hours. For Apple, it was just 6 hours. After all, the company was racing against time. Apple airlifted 1.5 million iPhones in 6 cargo jets from India, all to reach the US in time and beat the tariffs. And Apple was not alone. Companies across the globe scrambled to beat the clock. Their efforts may be futile right now because the tariffs have been paused and it gives them some time to breathe. But can they truly afford to rest? Our next report tells you.
It all started with an email, then another, then a flurry of calls from Cupertino to Chennai and from airline hangars to government offices. Apple wasn't trying to keep its efforts secret. It was just trying to move fast, really fast. On Wednesday, the tariffs came into place. By night, they were paused. But Apple didn't know about that. So they prepared for a contingency to move iPhones from India to the United States. The loophole was simple. Any goods en route before the deadline would be exempt. If they're loaded on the plane, they're safe, as long as it got going before the cutoff. So Apple wanted to beat the tariffs, and it did what only a trillion-dollar company can. It bought time. Reports suggest Apple stepped up production at its Foxconn factory in Chennai. It got extra workers and shifts were extended to Sundays. Meanwhile, the company lobbied authorities. At the Chennai airport, the usual time for clearing customs is 30 hours. For Apple, it was just 6 hours. Reports suggest it was a green corridor arrangement. With all of this in place, Apple used 6 cargo jets, 600 tons of iPhones. That's around 1.5 million iPhones. And they weren't alone. Companies like Dell, Lenovo and Microsoft sped up their shipments. They put pressure on the suppliers. The plan was to fly as many premium devices to the United States as possible. The focus was devices priced above $3,000. But not everyone has the luxury of a private air force. So across the globes, boardrooms lit up like war rooms. Shipping lines were flooded. Ports surged with traffic. The world's largest supply chains were bent, twisted and strained under the weight of the panic. Container ships handle about 90% of all global trade. They suddenly became VIP transportation. Rates from Shanghai to Los Angeles shot up 10% in a week. Ships that typically wait for full loads now left half-packed. That's because time was the enemy. At shipping companies like Maersk, executives fielded calls 24/7. Everyone was trying to reroute or expedite goods. But some companies could only watch the clock tick down. Japan's Nintendo delayed pre-orders for its long-awaited Switch 2 console. Jaguar Land Rover hit pause on US shipments altogether. And fast fashion giants Shein and Temu faced a crushing blow: the end of the de minimis exemption. What's that? Well, until now, the US had allowed the shipment of low-value items tariff-free. But that lifeline ends in May. For now, the tariffs have been paused. There's a 90-day reprieve. But for companies, this wasn't a win. It was a warning, because the message was clear. The global supply chain is now a moving target. Policy can shift in a matter of hours. Exemptions can vanish overnight. And while Apple managed to outrun the deadline this time, most businesses can't rely on speed and scale. The 90-day window buys time, but not certainty. If anything, it forces companies to reassess everything.
Now let's talk about the Chinese military. It is being hollowed out from the top. President Xi Jinping has struck again with yet another high-profile purge. The latest target is this man, General He Wei-dong. He was the PLA's second highest ranking officer, also the third most powerful man in China's military command. He has now been sacked and removed from the Central Military Commission. That's the PLA's top leadership body. The PLA is the People's Liberation Army. That's the Chinese army. Now, there have been other sackings in the recent past, but General He's exit is a very big deal. It is for the first time in 60 years that a serving vice chair has been fired. It's a clear sign of how far the Chinese president is willing to go. In the last 2 years, he has sacked 2 defense ministers and cleared out the top leadership of the PLA rocket force. This unit controls China's nuclear weapons. One by one, the generals are vanishing. The PLA is being reshaped with a single goal in mind: loyalty to Xi Jinping and to the Communist Party of China. Now, General He's ouster follows a familiar pattern. A few weeks ago, he vanished from public view. The general was expected to attend some important events, but he did not show up. Soon, word got out that he was being investigated. Multiple reports say that the general faces a corruption probe, which is usually the cover story for such a purge. Of course, this is more about more than graft. It's about control. Xi Jinping wants a military that obeys him without question. In February, some interesting findings came to light as part of a new report. A report that said that China's army may look strong, but it's not ready for war. The PLA has grown rapidly over the years, but military training still takes a backseat to politics. Consider this. The PLA spends 40% of its time not on military training, but on political indoctrination. 40% of the time. There's also confusion over power sharing. Military commanders are not independent within the PLA. They have to share power with Communist Party commissars. These commissars are part of the PLA, but they are political appointees. They're supposed to ensure party loyalty within the army, but they wield considerable power. And this has split the PLA's command and control structure. For a military force, having 2 power centers is dangerous. If China goes to war, who will the soldiers take their orders from? Who is calling the shots in the PLA? Is it their commanders or the Communist Party commissar? The thing is, Xi Jinping has centralized all the power. He controls the army. He controls the PLA through the Central Military Commission. President Xi wants strength, but only on his terms. And that is why he keeps purging his own generals. But each shake-up weakens the system further. It raises deeper questions about the PLA's readiness. Xi Jinping, in fact, gave them a target. He wants a war-ready army by 2027. This goal is aimed at Taiwan.
Realizing complete reunification of the country is the common aspiration of the people, the trend of the times, and the inevitability of history, which cannot be stopped by any force.
Xi says he's ready to take the island by force if needed, and the PLA is preparing for that scenario. But with so many generals removed, who is left to lead the fight? Some say China is preparing for war. But the purges are doing the exact opposite. They are stripping the army of experience, trust, and stability. Xi Jinping may be building loyalty, but he's weakening the command. The PLA is growing in size and budget, but as a force, it is fragile, not fearless, and far from being war-ready. Our next story is from New York City. A tourist helicopter plunged into the Hudson River. There were no survivors. Among the victims were a CEO from the Siemens Group, his wife, their 3 children, and the pilot. The cause? Experts say it was structural failure. The official word is not out yet. What we know is this: the chopper split apart mid-air. The rotor blade, still spinning, fell a few meters away. The videos are chilling. And the crash raises some serious questions. How safe are helicopter sightseeing tours? And who is accountable when the machine fails and lives are lost? Our next report brings you more.
On the 10th of April, New York City residents witnessed a shocking incident. A helicopter crashed into the Hudson River, leaving behind no survivors. On board were 6 people: Agustin Escobar, the CEO of Siemens in Spain, his wife, their 3 children, and the pilot. Many caught the crash live on camera, and the visuals are disturbing. The helicopter split into 2 parts. The tail rotor blade fell a few feet away while it was still spinning.
Oh my gosh.
The aircraft was a Bell 206 helicopter, and it was operated by New York Helicopter Tours, a tourism company that facilitates sightseeing chopper rides of New York City. The company's CEO has called the incident devastating, but he has dodged all questions about maintenance for now. U.S. federal aviation authorities have launched a full investigation. Though this could take some time, but eyewitnesses describe how the crash happened.
So I looked out my window right here and I saw a helicopter falling to pieces. And I watched multiple pieces splash down into the river below. And I was wondering what happened. Did it get shot down?
There was like an explosion on the propeller, but there was a little sliver of light. So the people that were next to me, we were like, was that a lightning? And then after that, we saw the plane was just spiraling down, like going from left to right like that. And we were like, oh my God. And we started screaming because we were like, is this really happening?
This isn't just a tragedy. It is a wake-up call. At least 38 people have died in helicopter crashes in New York City since 1977, and many of these involve charter and sightseeing helicopters. 2 incidents were reported in 2019 and 1 in 2018, all involving charter helicopters. In 2011, 2009, 2007, and 2005, all the crashes involved choppers used for sightseeing. And what about the company, the New York Helicopter Tours? They too have an unsafe record. In 2010, their helicopter was involved in a similar incident in Chile. In 2013, one of their helicopters made an emergency landing near the Hudson River. And now this tragedy. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration has issued multiple warnings in the past, particularly about the Bell 206 helicopter, the same one that crashed in the Hudson yesterday. It said the helicopter is prone to tail rotor and power failures.
Oh my goodness.
Warnings that may have prevented the recent crash. Were these ignored? And who will be accountable for the loss of lives? The investigation is still underway, but aviation experts are calling for more scrutiny against private tour operators. New York City's mayor says the incident highlights prolonged concerns about low-flying helicopters. For now, low-level flying activity over the Hudson has been stopped. But will this incident lead to any real change before the private sightseeing helicopter tours take to the skies again?
Our next story is from Oman. Tomorrow is a big day in the Sultanate. The world's eyes will be on its capital, Muscat. Why do I say this? Because Oman will host the US and Iran for talks. They've done this before. Remember, Oman played mediator in 2015 as well, when the first nuclear deal was signed. And it will do so again tomorrow. So what's on tomorrow's agenda? Iran's nuclear program. Again, you heard that right? The US and Iran do not have formal diplomatic ties, so they are sitting down for talks in a neutral country, Oman. Leading the American delegation is Steve Witkoff. He is US President Donald Trump's golf buddy, also Washington's special envoy to the Middle East. The Iranian side will be led by their foreign minister, and the talks tomorrow could have global consequences. I'll tell you why. Iran's nuclear program has been a flashpoint for years. Tehran insists that it is for civilian purposes. But the US and its allies have their doubts. They feel Iran is building a nuclear bomb. And a big reason for that is Donald Trump. He exited the first nuclear deal. That's when he was president in 2018. And he slapped more sanctions on Iran. He also ordered a drone strike, killing a top Iranian general. And how did Iran respond? By enriching their uranium from 3.6% to 60%. 3.6 to 60. Iran is about 6 months away from building a nuclear bomb. This is as per the latest estimates. Now, Donald Trump is back in office, and this time he wants to make a new deal. So they're meeting in Oman to discuss. But here is where it gets messy. Trump made the announcement last week. He said the talks will be direct, but Tehran gave out a different version. They say the talks will be indirect. There's deep mistrust, and it's already showing even before the talks begin. Trump also gave Iran 2 ultimatums. First, no nuclear weapons, and second, conclude a deal in 2 months or face military action. Listen to this.
I think if the talks aren't successful with Iran, I think Iran is going to be in great danger. And I hate to say it, great danger, because they can't have a nuclear weapon.
So Trump's message is loud and clear: play ball or face bombs. How is Iran responding? A bit more maturely. Tehran says it welcomes talks with the US. They want cooperation, not conflict. As per reports, Iran is open to an interim deal. Iranian officials say that Trump's 2-month deadline is too short, so a comprehensive agreement may not be possible. It needs more time. For now, Iran wants an interim deal. They're hoping to prevent military escalation. And they've also made some demands. No more sanctions and no military threats. Like I said, the talks begin tomorrow. The backdrop has been anything but peaceful. The US has increased its military presence around Iran. An additional aircraft carrier has been deployed. We already told you about the B-2 bombers in Diego Garcia. They have already been put to action. Their target? Iran's proxy groups. The Americans continue to bomb the Houthis in Yemen, and Israel already took care of Hamas and Hezbollah. These proxy groups gave Iran strategic depth, but now they're out of the picture. And things are only getting worse for the Islamic regime. Experts say Iran's military is at its weakest. Key generals have been assassinated. The Israeli airstrikes last year only deepened those wounds. As for the economy, it has been crippled by years of sanctions. So Iran has a weak military and a bad economy. It's a dangerous combo for any country. That explains their shift in tone. Iran's president said his country does not want war. They're seeking peace and dialogue.
We want peace. We want security. We are people of dialogue, but with dignity and pride. We are not seeking war, but in the face of any aggression, with the knowledge and capability that our dear ones Iranian scientists have created, we will stand powerfully.
So what's the big picture? Israel will be watching the talks closely. Netanyahu is not really a patient leader. For him, Iran having nuclear weapons is the red line, and he wants to blow up Iran's nuclear facilities.
First of all, Iran. We agree that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. This can be done in an agreement, but only if this agreement is a Libya-style agreement, that we go in, blow up the facilities, dismantle all the equipment, under American supervision and American execution. That is good.
Clearly, Israel and the US are in the same boat. What about Iran? Who is backing them? China and Russia. They have warned against any military action targeting Iran. So what should we expect tomorrow? At best, an interim deal and a roadmap for future talks. At worst, a clash of egos that would push the region closer to conflict. Because as things stand, trust remains in short supply. Now let's turn our attention to Los Angeles, home of Hollywood. It is preparing to host the Olympics in 2028 and it is bracing to witness a range of changes. For starters, there will be more events, a record 351 medal events. For the first time in Olympic history, more women than men will compete. And of course, there will be cricket, which is being widely seen as a grand gesture to woo India and India's 612 million cricket fans. Will it work? Here's a report.
Swimming at the 38,000-seater SoFi Stadium. Gymnastics at the home of the Lakers, the Crypto.com Arena. Track and field at the Memorial Coliseum. If you haven't caught the drift yet, this is Los Angeles, home to Hollywood. And now, it's bracing to host the world's biggest stage in sports, the Olympics. The Los Angeles Olympics will be held in 2028, and this week, the International Olympic Committee has approved the competition program. And it comes with a range of changes. The Games will witness a record 351 medal events. That's 22 more than the 2024 Paris Games. And a total athlete quota of 10,500 will be maintained across all the sports. For the first time in Olympic history, there will be more female athlete quota spots with 5,655 than male athlete quota spots with 5,543. The Games will have full parity in all team sports. This is a major step forward and it's part of the push to modernize the Olympics. The Olympic Committee says that these additions reflect our commitment to innovation and gender equality. A number of events will also make their debut, including the 50 meters backstroke, 50 meters breaststroke and 50 meters butterfly in swimming, a mixed-gender 4x100 meters relay in track and field, and a mixed-gender team event in artistic gymnastics. Plus, 5 sports will return or debut in Los Angeles: baseball, softball, flag football, lacrosse, squash and cricket. The last bit is seen as a way to increase India's interest in the Olympics. After all, this is the world's most populous nation and it has a massive cricket fan base. According to some estimates, it stands at about 612 million. That's more than the entire population of some countries. Plus, India is the current T20 World Cup holder, which is a major draw for fans. And it gives a commercial opportunity to the Olympic Committee, which is trying to boost viewership for the platform. Cricket's only previous appearance at the Olympics was at Paris in the year 1900, and now it's making a return, with gender parity as an added bonus. Both men's and women's events will be 6-team contests. There's no clarity yet on the qualification criteria, and it's expected to be finalized in the coming months. But this Olympic edition is expected to be Advantage India, one that the platform will be sure to capitalize on. Because in India, cricket isn't a sport, it's an emotion.
The United States is still imposing tariffs on China, and China is firmly opposed to such bullying. China will absolutely not accept pressure, threats and blackmail. That is not the right way to deal with China. If the US side really wants to talk, it should show an attitude of equality, respect and reciprocity. If the United States ignores the interests of the two countries and the international community and insists on fighting a tariff war and a trade war, China will certainly accompany it to the end.
We've seen the global markets going through quite a seesaw over Trump's tariff policies, and in particular policies or uncertainty in policies in relation to China. And now again, at a cabinet meeting at the White House on Thursday, we saw clearly contradictory statements emerge on China, hardly likely to be calming for the markets or bring clarity on what the US policy is. Trump, on the one hand, said a deal with China can be worked out.
And I'm sure that we'll be able to get along very well. I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
And within minutes, he was saying this.
What they've done to our country, they've destroyed our economic base to a large extent. The good news is we're very vibrant, and we're going to get it back fast. We already have. Look, we're making $2 billion a day now.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it more sharply.
One of the most important things I believe you'll achieve in your presidency is reordering the world in a proper way. For 31 years, more than 31 years now, multiple administrations have allowed the Chinese to deindustrialize this country, to take away jobs and factories and pillars of our national strength. And what you're doing now, I think, is a great service to our country, but ultimately to the world.
Trump insisted that the US is on a good track in negotiations with several other countries, but he did acknowledge that it may not all be smooth going.
We think we're in very good shape. We think we're doing very well. Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
The United States is
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Army uses robotic mules for rescue operations in Myanmar. Thousands in Sana'a protest against the US strikes in Yemen, and the world's oldest gorilla celebrates its 68th birthday at the Berlin Zoo. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1955, Air India Flight 300, known as the Kashmir Princess, was bombed mid-air. It crashed into the South China Sea on its way to Jakarta. 16 people died in the incident. The flight was chartered to carry delegates, including Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. He missed the flight due to some emergency. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
واكثر شعوب الارض خافت تولها وكان في يد الحكومات رجال ما كان خالقنا بيد جعلها معكم حتى يوم الدين معكم حتى يوم الدين ونحاصر من حاصر
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Big breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin, where after the sealing of the alliance between the BJP and the AIADMK for the Tamil Nadu Assembly polls, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has hailed the pact and said, and I quote, "We will ensure a government